listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is David Smith. He's the senior analyst for the Morgan Report, which you can find online at silver-investor.com. Welcome to the show, David.
It's good to be back, Jim.
Well, good to be back, but apparently your back's not all that good, so we won't keep you on the line too long here. Two things we wanted to talk about right now. You were mentioning it's kind of a scary place for metals, but there's still hope. You have 5 giants who have great policies who will help you invest well and still live well at the same time. So first of all, you were saying a scary place for metals right now.
Well, the last 18 months to 2 years have been a real grind, and some of the very best people in the business that have held positions are down 50 or 60% on some of the best stocks they have. So it's a difficult time to remain optimistic, and yet the things we've talked about in here, the things that are going to drive metals higher, have not gone away. In fact, they've become even more pronounced. And I do believe that when things finally turn around, it will be a surprise to all of us, and it will be a heartbreak to people who have given up before that happens. So in times like this, and all the time really, I always like to keep learning. I consider myself to be a learn-it-all rather than a know-it-all, and I kind of borrowed that phrase from David Morgan. He mentioned it a couple of days ago on one of his newscasts, and I thought that was really good. So I always want to learn more. And so these 5 people that I'd like to just mention briefly today are people. I could give you 5 more too, but I think that these are kind of first among equals, so they're all very good. And I learned so much from them, and not only have learned, but continue. And I hope that our listeners will maybe take a couple of these names and Google them and see what they have to say. And I think that they'll be richly rewarded, not only about how to make money, but how to live well, too, because I think all 5 of these people exemplify both of those characteristics. And
those 5 would be?
The first one is Jim Sinclair. And we've mentioned a couple of these names before over the months. But Jim he has a website called jsminesite.com. And he runs a mining company in East Africa. He is known as Mr. Gold. He had the largest number of gold contracts in the 1980s on the futures markets. He's one of the very few who predicted almost the exact top in gold. And he has probably given more back to the investment community than anybody that I know of. He's out there every day writing his blog and answering people's letters and holding their hands and this type of a thing. And for some of us, we're learning how to fish better because of what we read that he says. So I think he would be a tremendous person to look into and see what he has to say. The second person would be Frank Holmes, and we've talked about him before too. And I've heard Frank Holmes speak many times at different conferences. He runs U.S. Funds, usfunds.com. You can find a very content-rich website there. And he's such a great optimist, and he always makes you feel better when you hear what he has to say. Very knowledgeable, very optimistic, very forward-thinking, a real big-picture guy. The third person would be Eric Sprott. And Eric Sprott, as you know, runs Sprott Asset Management along with several other major players like Rick Poole and John Emery. And Eric is probably, under his Sprott Asset Management, has some of the largest holdings for a group of silver in the world, and also recently launched a new platinum palladium ETF. And he speaks a lot at conferences, and he's on different websites speaking as well too. And I think a person listening to what he has to say would be very much rewarded and learn a lot about what's going on and what's likely to go on. He's a very forward thinker.
And you're also talking about 2 other fellas.
The fourth one would be Nolan Watson, and he might not be too well known to people, but I've known about him for a number of years. I interviewed him once. I wrote a couple major articles on some of the companies that he's run, and he is currently the CEO of Sandstorm Gold and Sandstorm Metals and Energy. And people might know of him because he was probably the person more than any other to put together the silver streaming concept for Silver Wheaton when it was a 20-cent stock, and then after a division went on to $40-some eventually. And I'm not certain if the interview that I'm thinking about, where he was interviewed by David Morgan, I don't know if that's out there on YouTube or if it's as readily available as some of these others that I mentioned here above. But I would say this: if there is a listener that cannot find the interview of Nolan Watson that David gave last year, I think it was the middle of last year, please write to me at d@silver-investor.com, and I'll see if I can find it for you, because I'm not sure where it is. It may just be for members only, but I really don't know that. But I will find out the answer if somebody wants to write me. Nolan is just, when he talks about the way he goes about living his life and how he treats others, and he really gets it, as all these other people do, I think, that there's so much more to living than just making money, and it's how you make it, it's the relationships you have with people, how you deal in the business relationships and this type of a thing, and I think Nolan Watson just perfectly, in my view, exemplifies that kind of a person.
Well, you know, they used to make fun of the Japanese because when they did business with people, they wanted to get to know about you and your family and your background before you started getting down to nuts and bolts financials. Same kind of deal there.
That's really important, and I don't want to slight the Japanese in any way, but I've spent time in Japan, and I respect Japanese culture greatly. I spent my life in the martial arts. I spent a whole summer training in Japan a number of years ago. And you're right, they do want to have a personal relationship established with you before they sit down and start talking. And so there are certain cultural things that you need to go through and things like that to kind of be on their side, so to speak. I do find that, you know, it's kind of be difficult sometimes to know if you're really connected with that person initially, even after going through some of those customary cultural things, and that in no way disparages the Japanese, but they can be a little bit more difficult to get to know. But in our culture, which I guess we're more familiar with, it's a little easier for us sometimes to divine a person a little quicker, even just by listening to them, like listening to one of these videos of one of the people I mentioned, or hear them speak, or something like that. But I'll tell you, I have a pretty good ear for people, and a pretty good eye for what I call quality people. I think we're all equal as human beings, but there are some people that have maybe a whole lot more quality than others about their big picture. And I think these people have so much that I just have great respect for all of them. And the last person I'd like to mention is Frank Glistra. Frank, as many Canadians know, is probably one of the wealthiest Canadians. He's a billionaire. The particular thing that I'd like to have people consider, I'm sure he's been interviewed in many different venues, but the one that I was watching was a fairly long interview, a 44-minute interview that Cambridge House Productions put together. I think it was last September. And I actually put this on my desktop, and I would start listening to it while I was doing something else. And after a few minutes, I realized, you know, I can't be writing while I'm listening to Frank because I'm going to miss something important. So over the last few months, I started listening several times. Finally, yesterday, I sat down and listened to the whole thing and took a bunch of notes. And I'll tell you, if there's one person that you can gain so much from out there, this guy is someone that you can learn a lot about. You can learn a lot about him and how he approaches things and what has made him the incredible success that he is. And the thing about all these people, the 5 names that I mentioned, they all, to me, appear to be very modest. They wear their wealth and their fame and their accomplishments lightly on their shoulders, and that makes me respect them even more. And another thing, too, they all seem to be very calm when they're talking about the markets and when they're analyzing them and when they're giving advice. And I think in these markets, which are going to get more and more violent in terms of the price movements on an intraday basis, let alone a weekly, monthly, and year basis, I think it behooves all of us to try to be as calm as we can so that we are able to ride this gold and bull and platinum and palladium market right to the end and get as much as we can from it, and also grow as individuals.
Yeah, it's interesting. If you listen to any of those 5 individuals, they probably give you some really good ideas on how to improve your portfolio, not how to step in, or how to not step into poor investments. And then I think of Oprah Winfrey speaking in Vancouver, $400 a seat. I don't know if she told anybody there how they could make extra money or keep the money they've made. She did complain about the cold weather she ran into in Edmonton, as if we didn't know about that in Vancouver. That's why we live in Vancouver.
Right. Well, you know, these people really have done and been, and they keep doing. And there's a specific title that I think might help people find the interview with Frank Glistra that I'm referring to. And if they go to YouTube or just Google full interview with billionaire Frank Glistra, they will find the one that I'm referring to. And, you know, I sent this to my 2 adult children yesterday, and I said, please take time to listen to it and let me know what you think. And you're going to learn so much more than just about money and metals. And one of the last questions that Frank was asked, he is largely a self-educated man. He has a college degree, but he didn't get a bunch of advanced degrees. But he accomplished more than most people do with many degrees. And he was asked, how do you educate yourself? And he said, read, especially history. He said, everything you need to know about the future is there in black and white. Just focus and believe on what you're going to do and that you're going to be successful. And if you do that and you're strongly enough believed in that, you will succeed. Very motivating as far as I'm concerned.
Read some Confucius. I mean, there's history for you.
These things are really the same throughout cultures. And when you find people like these five and a few others who are able to articulate it and who demonstrate by their own success that they really know what they're talking about, I think it really behooves us to pay attention, all of us.
Yeah, and I really, thank people who have, made a fortune, have kept it, and are willing to share their advice. They don't just try to just keep it all for themselves. They, I think, are of the belief, the more good investors we have out there, the better business will be for everyone.
I think that's another measure of their humility and of their willingness to share, because, it didn't come easy for any of them. But they kept at it, and it shows all of us that we may never become billionaires, and that's okay, or even millionaires, but we have a chance to do a better job, and sometimes just doing the trade properly and coming out on it profitably and knowing that we did it right, that can be tremendously fulfilling. So the concept is identical, whether the trade nets you a few $100s or whether it nets you $500 million, I believe.
My guest has been David Smith. He's the senior analyst for the Morgan Report, which you can find online at silver-investor.com. And if you need to get a hold of David and ask him some more questions about these interesting people he's brought up, you can contact David at d@silver-investor.com. You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, and you can get a hold of us at info@HowStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard.